Good evening, everyone. This is a very, very special evening, and I want to welcome you to Inner City Arts. My name is Christine Kim. I am, well, like our speaker tonight, Christine Kim. We had been trying to meet each other for many, many years, and we finally met last year, and I'm really excited that she's here from Berlin doing this program. I first want to thank the folks at Inner City Arts and DJ Kurz and Def West for connecting us with you all. We at GYOPO, we're an organization run by 10 steering committee members, but we don't have a space, and so we do programming around Southern California, and we really rely on these relationships with nonprofits and friends and other spaces to host them. And I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about GYOPO, and then passing the mic to Ellie Lee, who's another one of our steering committee members. This is actually an important week for GYOPO. It's a bit of an anniversary because 2 years ago, we assembled informally a bunch of Korean American artists, writers, curators, performers, cultural producers, and really thought about the implications of what was then just after the presidential election, thinking about the implication for immigrants, immigrant communities, marginalized people, support for art and culture institutions and programming around the country. And what came out of the series of informal gatherings was the realization that we really needed to form a sort of a local grassroots organization to promote and create greater artistic, cultural, political, and professional exchange. GYOPO, which translates to a Korean person outside of Korea. And you could be a GYOPO in Austria, in New Zealand, in Japan, in any place in the world. We aim to strike a balance between dedicated spaces for GYOPO, dynamic intersectional discussions, and public forums. The mission of GYOPO is we are a coalition of diasporic Korean artists, curators, writers, cultural producers, and art professionals based in Los Angeles, interrogating issues around contemporary art, culture, networks, intersectionality, sorry, am I going too fast? Social justice, through impactful programming and community alliances. Our past few programs have kind of exceeded our wildest dreams of all the people we would gather together and the conversations that would be generated from these programs. And just to name a few, to give you a sense of the types of programs that we host, New York-based artist Annika Yi, which was co-presented at the Korean Cultural Center in Mid-Wilshire. She talked about her work, which deals with the digital, the biological, the sensorial, environmental, and olfactor. Rita Gonzalez, who together with me is a contemporary art curator at LACMA. We presented on our section of the Gwangju Biennale. We were part of the Gwangju Biennale in Korea. On our section, which was called The Ends, The Politics of Participation in the Post-Internet Age. We also had a program where Nam Hee Lee, professor at UCLA in Korean history, and Christopher Phillips, who's formerly at the International Center of Photography in New York, talked about the work of Han Young-soo, post-war Korean photography during the period of urban transformation, hosted at Back Fine Art. We had a phenomenal program with a screening of Spa Night with writer-director, Spa Night, writer-director Andrew An and Karen Townsend at the Underground Museum, in which the discussion centered around queerness in the context of U.S. Asian American immigrant and POC communities, how queerness flourishes and how it is monitored, how we grapple with ideas of homophobia in minority communities, and how queerness is translated across generations and traditions. I know that a number of the steering committee members are here. Ellie Lee, as I mentioned before, Young Chung, Kavier Moon, Young Soon Min, Eric Kim, Kavier Moon, Young Soon Min, Eric Kim, John Yoon, Nancy Lee, Gala Porras Kim, and Jennifer Moon. And I want to thank them for coming together with me to work on all the programming that we bring to you all. Finally, on December 2nd, at Commonwealth and Council, which is a gallery in Koreatown run by Young Chung on our steering committee, December 2nd from 5 to 8 p.m., GYOPO is hosting a holiday party and a launch of a new limited edition print by artist Gala Porras Kim that will benefit GYOPO and the upcoming programming. So I think that's all I have for my notes today. I'm going to pass the mic along to Ellie Lee, who will introduce our fantastic speaker tonight, Christine Sun Kim. So here's Ellie. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Ellie, and I'm a steering committee member, and I'm so honored to introduce Christine Sun Kim tonight. Christine is an artist who was born in California and is now based in Berlin. She works in a range of media, including sound, drawing, ceramics, and performance, focusing on linguistic authority, the process of translation, and the deconstruction of preconceived ideas about sound. Christine shifts her relationship to sound away from the rules and values society has placed on it. With her work, she produces and translates sounds based on her own perception. She's developed her own visual language, which employs elements from various information systems, such as written language, musical notation, and American Sign Language, and expands what each of those systems is able to communicate. Over the last several years, she has presented work at numerous notable venues, including White Space in Beijing, London's Carol Fletcher Gallery, De Apple in Amsterdam, the Nye Muziek in Oslo, Sound Live in Tokyo, the Berlin and Shanghai Biennales, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Rubin Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, and MoMA PS1 in New York. And Kim was also awarded a TED Fellowship and MIT's prestigious Media Lab Fellowship. So once again, we are so honored to welcome Christine Sun Kim tonight. And a warm welcome also to the NCOD, National Center of Deafness audience members tonight. And let's give Christine a warm welcome. And for those of you who don't know, the way to clap in ASL is to move your hands like that. All right, let's welcome Christine Sun Kim.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here this evening with you. So my practice as an artist can't be condensed in a few words with sound, language, and culture. It would be impossible to encapsulate that, so it's best to show you my art in the way of several different projects I've done, and hopefully at the end of this presentation you'll have a better idea of my work. Checking to see if the mic's working. Heavy start. In 2013, I did a piece called Subjective Loudness. I was invited to go to Japan, to Tokyo, and it was my first time. I was extremely excited. I had a concept of a performance And there was a strange stage rule, which was no sound over 80 decibels. And I thought, 80 decibels? That's strange to apply that rule to me as a deaf performer, because it's an outdoor stage and they had that rule so as to be respectful to the neighbors. I thought, 80 decibels? I have 115 decibel loss in my right ear and 95 in my left. And it caused me to think about what would 70 to 90 decibels sound like. And these were the sounds. There were lots of sounds. A lot of machine-related sounds. Like washing machine, busy urban street, air conditioning, truck, subway, blow dryer. I thought it was a little bit weird that most of these were mechanical, loud sounds. I thought, wouldn't it depend how much power you're using or where you were standing, closer or further away from maybe a washing machine? But I decided to think about these things, and I took these sound rules, this list, and created a score. I was working with 200 Japanese people in the audience, and I decided to cut up these cards, cue cards, and I would be the conductor, and ultimately the audience would be my voice. Kind of the same idea, the concept of working with an interpreter, of conducting, and I started with these cards from the list, and then I created these individual words on the cards. And you can see, for example, where it says electric shaver. So it became less about what the word meant, and the words just became noise without speech of the specific word. Radio. Please use your imagination to make a long and slow sound of motorcycle. So I gave these cards out. I'll show you a film. There were 100 microphones and 200 speakers on the most beautiful stage. This was not about the result in terms of lots of noise, because I don't hear. It was more about me being responsible and creating the score. It was my work and it was my noise. I had ownership of it. This was the last card. In one long continuous sentence, word. The film has sound, but what you'll hear just becomes sound. You might hear a few words in the beginning that become sound. GYOPO. I had a live translator. I would type in English and the captioner would caption in Japanese underneath my instructions. This is Game of Skill 2.0. I had this idea for many years, and it was hard to find the right technician. Most people said it couldn't be done. It would be too difficult, impossible, or too expensive, too costly. I was fortunate to find Levi Lorenzo, and he was able to take my idea, and I wanted to create, and how deaf people have lots of skills for listening. They have to lip read, sign, write, gesture. There's a lot of listening skills. They have to work hard. I'm not stereotyping, but in general, hearing people can just be passive listeners. They can just, noises come in and out. Everyone is basically a passive listener. But deaf people have a lot of skills. So I wanted to give a new skill to hearing audiences. So this was Game of Skill 2.0. The concept was that I wrote a text that people wouldn't have access to, except for myself, museum curators, and a museum intern, and the technician. So I wrote it, so it's my voice, and the intern read it and inputted it in these machines, which were connected with a magnet to this Velcro strip. It was kind of the idea of the concept of a turntable, a record player with a needle. So the person would be the needle, walking on the turntable, and they would have to make contact with the Velcro to make noise. If the needle touched the Velcro, it would make noise. If they walked quickly, the sound would happen. If they walked forward, the noise would happen. If they walked backward, the noise would sound backwards. So some people had to go 2 or 3 times to develop a new skill until they could finally hear a clear word. And there was a big reward there. Some people got the full sentence. So everyday listening became labors. It was hard work. They were unfamiliar with that. Listening became a new experience again. So in this video, you cannot really hear the words clearly, but you'll see the people trying to find the words, hear the words by walking. This is the crime scene. My partner used to have a graveyard shift job, meaning when he came home, he wouldn't take a short little afternoon nap. It was an all afternoon nap. And I got a little annoyed because I felt like he would lay on this couch and I would be annoyed because my sounds sounded amplified, normal sounds were amplified, and even quiet noises became loud. And this was happening day in and day out. And I got a little annoyed, so I came up with this idea and turned it into a performance piece. I went to the Frieze Art Fair in London, and there were 6 deaf and 1 hearing performers who choreographed a piece using everyday domestic items, including chairs, cups, dishes, utensils, and we choreographed a piece showing polite and not so polite noise. For example, polite noise. Not so polite. We choreographed this into 2 performances, one with chairs and one with everyday items used at home. The first thing I did was design a costume. You know, they use green screens in films as a backdrop to help edit the actor into action. So I designed this costume with the concept of, should I be quiet? But it was visually loud, so there was kind of a little bit of irony there. And then I thought I would use the same color as the couch for my next costume. Not bad. Not enough, but okay. And in the next video, you'll see the performance. I was born in 1980, and that's when captioning just developed because of the ADA and and accessibility, so captioning was in its beginning stages. Only blockbuster movies had captioning, while foreign films and indie films weren't captioned. So I think my taste in movies is awful. I love cheesy blockbuster movies because I was raised on those. I noticed that every time a sound appeared, the captionist kept it very reductive. I felt like there was a lot of sound going on with the action, but there would be 2 or 3 words in the caption. So I noticed that every time the sound caption came in, I always thought of one long continuous sound. And so I created these notes without a staff, because you hear high and low pitches, but I don't. So these are just notes, plus legato, which is a musical term for these slurred notes tied together by with a line underneath or over. There's no space for silence in each of these. They're all continuous sounds.
Epic, ominous music. Royalty-free song. Suspenseful background music. Very fast rap song.
That led to this film. How many of you have seen Kumiko, the Treasure Hunter? Any of you? Not many. It was made in 2014, and I honestly don't recommend that movie. But I did watch the movie, and I, of course, turned the captioning on. And the story is about this woman in Tokyo who finds a copy of the movie Fargo, and she's convinced that it's really a map of treasure or money. So she flies to Minnesota, and she's looking. And the movie has a very strange character who's just wandering with very little dialogue. So there's a lot of slow moments in the movie. While I was watching this movie, I realized that I was reading the captioning. I went from watching to reading, and I was fascinated by that. It seemed like since there was no dialogue, the captionist added a lot of captioning. She was over-captioning, in fact. So I'm going to show you the captioning from the first 30 minutes. I'm going to go through them quite quickly. That's a good one. Phew. I started to think of a new project, close readings. I thought of different movies and different scenes related to the idea of voice, like The Addams Family, you know, Thing, the hand, or The Little Mermaid. And I invited 4 deaf friends, Jeffrey Mansfield, Ariel Baker Gibbs, Allison O'Daniel, who's here in the audience tonight, and Lauren Ridloff, and I told them to add their own captions. Emotions could be noise, a table could be a sound, just be creative, there were no rules. Be innovative. So I'll show you an example by Ariel. There's no sound. I have a 16-month-old daughter. I'm a new mom, and this is one of my top mommy moments, so memorable, in Beijing, in China. In October or November of last year, exactly a year ago, I went with my partner and my baby, and we wanted to see the Great Wall of China. We were worried that there would be lots of crowds, so we got there at 7 in the morning, but it was so quiet, although it was cold, and it was time to breastfeed, so I sat at the wall and breastfed my baby, and this is one of my most favorite moments. Before my child was born, while I was pregnant, I started to think if I had a deaf child, I would have to do this and that. If I had a hearing child, I would have to do this and that. Having a hearing partner, I started to become a little paranoid. In America, I have a lot of deaf friends, a deaf sister, a huge support system, but in Berlin, I have very few deaf friends. I'm there mostly related to my work colleagues and my work friends, and I decided how would my child be exposed to language, and I came up with the sound diet. I became a doctor at home. I was prescribing amounts of sound. So I'll show you some of my newer art. I wasn't anal, but I just wanted people to become mindful of my prescriptions. A P appears a lot in my work. P represents piano, which is quiet. If a violinist sees a P in a score, they play quietly. If there's two Ps, more quiet.
Suggested amount of watching Netflix with volume up when a baby is in close proximity.
This is the measurement of a full day, beginning in the morning, all the way to the end of the day, when the baby goes to sleep. So you notice in the morning, there's bits of noise. And then later on in the day, it's quieter. I am not a morning person, but my partner is. He's up in the morning watching YouTube, listening to music. As I wake up, I want the noise to quiet down a little bit.
Suggested amounts of listening to Spotify on the laptop when a baby's in close proximity.
So you see, as the evening progresses, there's more peace. It's quiet time. I was encouraging less sound because it was sleep time. This is a large piece, 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter. And here's a close-up of that.
Suggested amount of getting a baby's attention by waving hands or stomping on the floor instead of using voice.
Hearing people have a sonic identity. They have their voice. Like Francine has a voice. John knows his voice. They're very recognizable, my mom's voice. But deaf people have a visual identity. So I didn't want to give my baby a vocal identity, my vocal identity. Instead, I turn off my voice and wave my hands or stomp my feet, flash the lights, tap the wall, and it works. It's easy. She looks right at me every time I make a noise. It's nice. It's a good system. These are 1/16 notes, so they're very rapid, like clapping and stomping.
Suggested amounts of allowing friends to sing songs to a baby.
One of my dear friends is a musician and often visits and knows my practice as an artist and asked, "Can I sing to your baby?" And I thought, that's a strange request, but sure, of course you can. So I decided to create this piece as part of my sound diet. And I have a 6-song limit per day. That's it.
Suggested amount of sound toys for a baby to play with.
When I became a new mom, I'm sure those of you who are parents know that you're given so many gifts, and a lot of them are toys that make a lot of sound. I feel like the world has so much language and music and sound all the time, and now here I am in my home. I wanted it to be a safe space, so I wanted to control the amount of sound toys. 6 toys. 6 sounds from 6 toys. That's it.
Suggested amount of spoken language with a baby whose parents communicate in sign language.
I feel like in the world, everyone is speaking, but in my home, I wanted to establish some rules as a safe space for me and for my baby as well. So when I'm communicating with my child, these are my priorities in the home. Baby eating my homework? I think baby doesn't agree with the diet. I wanted to explain the concept of my ASL work. So this hand shape represents one person. However, half of ASL depends on facial expression for context, grammar, meaning. So this hand shape can be used over and over again, but the facial expression dictates the situation, the context, the meaning. I'll give you some examples of how the face can affect the meaning.
I walk normally. I walk happily. I walk sluggishly. I walk hurriedly. You walk into me. You walk towards me aggressively. You walk around me suspiciously. You walk in unexpectedly. You turn and walk out. We walk into each other. We walk past each other.
In this project, I worked with my partner, Thomas Mader, who is hearing and is a new signer. I'm a native signer, having grown up with sign language. So you know the game, the arm game, where someone puts their arms through someone else and they have a lot of facial expressions. So here's some awkward situations. When I moved and uprooted my life from America about 5 years ago, where I was born and raised, and moved to Germany, it was interesting. America has a long history. We talk about history beginning around the time of Christopher Columbus, which informs culture and tradition, food culture, etc. When I went to Germany and Europe, I realized that they had a more extensive history. But my 1 month in China really taught me that there was so much. It made me think about what constitutes a future because of their vast, extensive history. America has a recent past and future. Europe has a little bit deeper past. And you can see the future. But in China, I felt like there was such an extensive past that made me visualize such a huge, distant future. This is the sign for future. I felt like I needed 3 parts to create the full sign, the future. The hand movement, the elbow, the second line below, and the top line, visualizing what the future constitutes, looking towards the future. Those 3 parts created the future. I felt like this is the close future, the future. And then a little further is a future. I felt like the future is kind of generic. Maybe it's a societal thing, a human thing. Everyone wants to own a house, have a nice job, health insurance, a car, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 children, save money, have money for retirement. So this is the generic, futures being generic. Here's the P representing quiet. These are quiet futures. Could be quiet, contentment, a simple life. A clean, clear future. I envision the 2 futures, one inside the other. The F is the opposite of P. Piano is the P, and F is forte, loud versus quiet. So the P is quiet and past, and the F is loud and future. This is an overly ambitious future. I feel like the future is a lot of work, a lot of planning and organizing, goals, investing time, energy. So there's like a long future and then a rest, like a truck stop. Okay, and then when you're ready, you can continue on. When future briefly pauses. This last year, I envisioned the line for future becoming thick, which had a lot of meaning, emotion. It could be anxiety, or it could be something very positive. The Whitney Museum in New York commissioned me to do a billboard. I felt very honored, and this was the artwork there on the High Line in New York. I felt like it matched New York perfectly. It really fit because people are often obsessing about the future, startup, technology, investing. And at the same time, in Germany, and while I was in Germany seeing the elections here and Trump, I had the idea of what is home like my home, is it in danger? And I started thinking about the future, both negative and positive. This billboard was recently taken down. Fortunately, I had another billboard by the political group Freedoms. They asked several artists to put up billboards all across the country. This is in Jefferson City, Missouri, and it's up, still up, through the end of this month, which was very exciting. It was a good year. 2 billboards in 1 year, not bad. Yes. I want to show you visual vernacular or visual puns for ASL. So if you can follow me, I'm going to count from 1 to 10. You can follow. 1, I can't see. 2, I'm trusting you. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 2, 5, 8. It's a little bit of a deaf pun for very interesting, and I'll show you the sign. It's a little bit of an English influence. Very interesting. You see the 3 numbers, the 2s, the 5s, and the 8s, and they create the signs very interesting. So 258. I got a tattoo by a friend who I think is here in the audience. Jerome, hi. It was my first time using photography as a medium, and I really enjoyed the medium and intend to become more involved in that. In Germany, I had an interesting experience after moving there. I was approached by a few experiences of racial tension. People didn't know that I was deaf because it's not visible, so they came up to me and gestured towards my eyes, and I felt like these confrontations were uncomfortable and enraged me. I had this rage, and it paralleled my experience as a deaf person. So I decided to create some drawings about deaf rage. In my deaf community, there is a feeling of rage, but it's not often discussed. There is an understanding, but it's not necessarily openly discussed. So this one idea became 6 rages, and these were the 6 pieces that were created. I'm just going to show you one of the pieces, and the format was based on mathematical angles. So I took the idea of the angle to show the amount of rage.
Degrees of institutional deaf rage.
There's other rage like anger while traveling, rage related to deaf education, etc. These are a little bit hard to read. I'm going to try and get a little bit closer.
Seating arrangements not set beforehand. The second one is 1 interpreter instead of 2 for a full days of work. The third one is a long video with 0 captions. See, there's more rage in the angle. Organizers not willing to compensate interpreters for social dinner hours. And an audiovisual team refuses to add lighting to make interpreters visible. And third, the important one, so much red tape that the accessibility budget cannot be touched.
I've performed and presented and spoke a lot at huge institutions, and it's interesting, I've often faced, we don't have a budget for you because you're not a student. They comply with the ADA, they have an accessibility budget, but they can't touch it. There's a lot of red tape involved, and I've experienced and encountered this quite a bit. So how to get the money, how to access the budget to pay for services. This also is a pie chart showing you why my hearing daughter signs. I'll read it because I'm not sure if you can read it.
I'll use her, this is a bit of a joke, I'll use her as my interpreter in the future, so I can tell her bedtime stories, so I can share family gossip, family dinners, so she can tell me what she needs and wants, so I can watch her growing up, and higher intelligence. And also, my sister is also deaf, so she has a son. And I'll show you the biggest reason. It would be lame if her dad would have to interpret for us. I mean, it's true.
This is an episode of The Simpsons where Bart was in a miniature golf tournament, and Homer, his father, was stressing him out and pressuring him to win. And Homer was extremely anxious, and Lisa, being the good sister that she is, said, "Come on, Bart, let's take a walk." She took him up to the mountains, and they went up to the top of this mountain at a sunset, and she said, "I have a 3,000-year-old riddle for you to help clear your mind. What's the sound of one hand clapping?" And Bart said, "That's easy." The end.
So now we'd like to open it up to Q&A.
Can you please turn the lights on so I can see the audience?
So, we'd like it up to open it up. We're gonna open this up. Thank you so much. And thank you. We'll open it up to questions. And raise your hand and we'll bring them.
Hi, Christine. I wanted to ask about your
Hi.
relationship to drawing, and if that practice entered your artwork with these kind of diagrammatic, kind of data-driven almost visualizations, or if you had any kind of representational drawing that came before in the past.
I did a drawing. It's in my TED Talk. I think I showed the 4 different drawings in the past. It was kind of like the future line, but it was the drawing done in the past. Did that answer your question?
Not quite. I mean, drawing in terms of representing a scene or a story, people, drawings that you might find, in a European classical tradition or ancient Chinese classical tradition, things like this. Not so much the representing words.
You mean a notational system?
No.
More of technical drawings or just art in general?
Art in general.
I think I'm still not understanding the question.
I find your drawing style, the visual style of your drawings very, very distinctive. And I guess I was wondering if you had a relationship with drawing or art making that was composed of representational images rather than being diagrammatic.
Not really, no. I think a lot of the drawings are based from ASL because ASL is a spatial language. And I just visualize clearly, but it's hard to put it down on paper. So that's why the music system is so fascinating because it's complex and you have this way to notate it. You have notes. So it's the same concept with ASL and drawing. It's from the language itself and my everyday communication. Thank you.
Hi, I'm very impressed with your work. I'm wondering how, as a deaf person, how did you get involved with music and sound, and how does that influence your art to make it visual?
How did I get involved? That's a big question. I'm going to try and condense it. Basically, I've read for many years and struggled and have a lot of respect for readers. I never really enjoyed the process and was fascinated with conceptual art, but really it wasn't I wasn't accessing it. But when I went to Berlin, I was awakened in New York City, where I was for 12 years. I felt like I was in a very small space. My personal space was very small. There were a lot of people, work, stress. But when I went to Berlin for the first time, it felt big, it was affordable, I could ride my bike around. Time was more leisurely. I had more time, the days were longer, and I felt like I could physically see my ideas coming to fruition. In New York, I couldn't, but in Berlin, I could physically move and visualize my ideas. It was an awakening. So I thought, why sound and noise wasn't my thing, it was a hearing thing. That's how I was when I was growing up. I had to awaken and change my way of thinking, and that happened in Berlin. So I had this fire burning, and the whole process was terrifying, but fortunately I had a lot of people support. I had grant money, I had art residencies, and I was able to, over the years, really show my art related to sound. I hope that explains it. Safe, I'm safe. I have two questions. You might have answered one. The first one, you've been to so many different countries. Do you see the different countries depending on different sounds? Like maybe here in the United States, they're more dependent on sound. In China, maybe less so. Is it quieter? Second question. You work with sound related to quiet. ASL is very quiet. How do you find your quiet? How do you balance that? Do you mean what is my definition of quiet in ASL? My question is if you're working and there's sound there, does sound affect your communication as a whole in the hearing world? I'm trying to explain it. Forget my second question, just my first question. Interesting question. I think my understanding is mostly dependent on physical language. For example, in Germany, they don't use facial expressions enough, only when they're annoyed. People tend to have minimal facial expressions. They like quiet. If I stamp my foot, people will look at me. For example, in Italy, they use a lot of physical language. I can gesture, and people don't even know I'm deaf. I can just gesture. I'm very visual. Lots of visual, physical. So how people respond to noise, facial expressions. In Italy, they catch my facial expressions. In Germany, they may not. It depends on the country and the culture and the physical language.
I have two questions. Hi, I have two questions. One, your style. The arm game, did you rehearse that?
We did rehearse it a couple times, but we just improv'd it mostly.
And secondly, where can I watch this again? Your art or your presentation, or how can I access that?
It's not available online, but I might upload a short clip to my website soon.
Hi, that was wonderful. wanted to ask about the drawings. It seems,
Could you step aside just a bit?
sorry. So, right. I just wanted to ask about your handwriting in the drawings. It seems so specific to use your own handwriting rather than somebody else's, or to use a typewriter or a keyboard or something. And I wanted to know a bit more about, that logic.
My handwriting is part of my identity, and it changes with my emotions. It's like a signature. My actual signature is very messy. Sometimes I have no patience. I'm writing very quickly. I'm even missing letters when I'm writing. So I feel like caps help me focus and write and express myself. My ex-boyfriend's father used to write all in caps, and I was fascinated by that. It was bold. And so I adopted that style of writing.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. And I have like 2 questions. I also have 10 questions. One might be opposed to your drawings, which is really personal way of making art, which I really appreciate. You also have a lot of like performance art, which is like having a lot of participants with anonymous audience and group performancers. And in that situation, it'll be really different of like you being a leader. And it was quite interesting to like make audience to focusing on your visual language, and like that, like leadership positions is totally different. And like I guess like you're really having a lot of works that's involving as a group or collaborating with the audience. Like I'm kind of repeating, I think. And I wonder about like that experience, and what do you enjoy about those way of making work, and how do you think about like community or like group of people working together, and like is there any kind of specific story behind that, or how do you think like what is the importance of the community in the art realm of art?
That's a really good question related to community and collaboration. I still do collaborate. In the beginning, I was a collaboration whore. I love to collaborate. I worked with interpreters in the beginning. Interpreters, the relationship is like dating. It's complex. Sometimes personalities fit and sometimes they don't, and you build on those relationships. So 2 become 1, really. The process itself is exhausting. It's very disempowering and at the same time not. So that led to working with the idea of sound. In the beginning, I had no idea. I felt like I didn't know how to work with equipment, how to work with people. So I felt it would be best to collaborate with a hearing person who had status, and that collaboration would help me progress and educate me, and in turn I would educate them. And it seemed that collaboration created more attention. So much collaboration was very successful, but now I have my platform, and so I'm collaborating less and working alone, solo, more. I love collaborating with interpreters. I used to have limited choices. I would have some negative experiences that weren't so pleasurable. I would be stuck. I was young, I went to college, and there I took on more of a leadership role and became more self-aware. I had to make decisions, negotiations, how to earn money, how to navigate life. And not only that, but the deaf community is very small. The world is large, but the deaf community is small. Although I know a lot of people, I have some very close friends who are mostly deaf. And I felt like it was a way of recognizing them by collaborating. And those were my groups in my community.
Hi. I just have a question in terms of, do you identify yourself as a Korean American? And what is your relationship to Korea and the Korean language?
I call myself a little bit of a bad Korean. I'm bad at math. I feel like growing up, I had a strong cultural background, a strong Korean cultural background. I have a large family in America, almost 50 first cousins from both sides. So a lot of celebrations, a lot of weddings. I know behavior, bowing, food, customs, culture. But I feel like it depends where I am, what group I'm in, and then I make a shift. If I'm deaf, I'm in a deaf group. I identify deaf. If I'm with women, I identify as a woman. But when I became a mom, I wanted her to know that she had a Korean identity too. So that's something that's informed my way of thinking. I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but my Korean culture relates to my family more than Korean culture itself. I went to Korea for the first time 3 or 4 years ago. I think it's funny, I went to Japan first and then Korea. And I don't know how to speak Korean.
Hi, my question is, when you in school or growing up in your family and you're signing, did you struggle with your identity as Asian and deaf in school with mostly Caucasians? Did you have cultural issues?
Thank you. That's a very important question. Fortunately, my parents sign. Very fortunately, my sister is also deaf, so I grew up in a signing household, but the rest of the family, not so much. Some can sign, but never really experienced full communication, so I struggled with that and developed some annoyance or anger. I think that's a common experience for deaf people in families. In high school, elementary school, they were all deaf. There were a few Asians, but mostly not. So I never really focused on that. I was just in a deaf program. I never really questioned my Asian identity. When I went to college, I started to think more about that. That's a short answer. Sure. I think there's a person
We'll do
back.
one last question.
And if needed, you can ask me questions after this.
Hi, I was fascinated. I realized that a lot of deaf people growing up tend to take their hearing aids off. And I wonder in your travels and how you developed your relationship with sound.
Taking the hearing aid off, I think in middle school, it was a little bit of a political act. I can live without speaking. I had speech therapy for many years. I was taught to speak. It was a tool, but it was not a language. But it was a little bit difficult. I can't lip read for shit. So it forced me to write and communicate using gestures and different modes of communication. It's a little bit related to the question of how I work with sound and how I started and travel. It's more like I ignored that. I thought sound is not my thing, but when I started working with sound, I understood my deaf identity much better. It was strange. Working with sound and then being deaf, I was like, right. It felt like my identity improved and developed, and I understood myself so much better while working with sound. I think when you're working with something new, something alien, it's an awakening. Working with sound gave me confidence, and one thing in the beginning when I was working with sound at Bard College, they had a great program in upstate New York. Everyone was so excited. You're the sound artist. You're going to bring new sound. It was almost like bringing a new color. That's impossible. So it was a little bit confusing. There was a romantic idea of this, and I struggled with that initially. It took me a year to really say, no, I don't want to create a new sound. But they looked at me as silence. And I really didn't know what that meant, because they use sound to measure and explain silence. But what do we use? I always thought that silence meant just a garbled noise or like white noise. It was never about complete silence. It was more about stillness as silence.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Christine. And thank you to our interpreters, Francine and John.